Well, I did play at school. I went to Oldham Newton Boys' School, but before that I was soccer. I went to the Braunston Hall. Now, you remember the Braunston
I do.
Hall? I went there when it opened, and what a super place it was. You know, the hall there being converted to a school, all the animals round the side, rabbits running by the thousand, and I played soccer. I was a goalkeeper, not much bottle, but Saturday morning we played St John's of Clarendon Park, and they were one of the top schools in the city. And I made a few saves, and there, I suppose you call him the team manager now, gave me tuppence, so I suppose you're professional. But anyway, I went to Oldham Newton Boys' School in the town and started rugby football. Then the war came and the school moved to Newark Girls' School. I assume they thought the bombs were going to drop on the city, etc. And the Newark Girls' School on the Foss Road, the girls would go in the morning, the boys in the afternoon. So not only am I an old Newtonian, I'm an old Newark Girls' School, whatever they call themselves.
Yes. I bet you kept that quiet when you played rugby.
No one asked me, fortunately. I enjoyed, schools rugby, and that was where it was all taught. In 1945, end of the war in Europe in May, and the pre-war secretary of the Tigers, Eric Thornillow, started to get a fixture list together for the Leicester Football Club. From its formation, the Tigers, apart from a few years, had been an invitation side, and there was a lot of politics involved with local clubs, and after the war there was a joining of local clubs to one extent of a team called the Harlequins that Doug Norman, famous Leicester player, had formed during the war for blokes on leave, etc. And he was asked by Eric Thornillow if he would support the Tigers. And so fixture list came out, and the Tigers started. My first game with them was at Cardiff Arms Park, which was the national stadium then. September the 8th, I can remember it now as clear as could be. On the train at 6:30 in the morning, about 10 players there. The other guys were servicemen who weren't billeted, stationed round here, and they were coming in from all parts of the globe. We arrived at Cardiff having had sandwiches on the train, and then we went into the Arms Park, drafty, change in accommodation. There was also, on the other side of the National Stadium, there was the county cricket ground. Well, during the war, a mine had dropped on the centre of the playing area, and they just filled it up, and it wasn't a very good pitch. Had a greyhound track round the outside. There were some 40-odd thousand people turned up for that game, because everyone was looking for relaxation after 6 years of war. We went out onto the park, a lot of strangers, but we enjoyed ourselves, and we lost 13-6.
You were a flanker or number 8, I think, weren't you? But you scored a couple of tries.
I know, what an occasion. 2 tries, I don't know. I was never a great player. I enjoyed my football. I knew my limitations, and I was glad to be part and parcel of it. I considered myself a good captain. I captained the A team a lot, and I considered myself a good tactician. I used to make changes during the game, positional changes and this sort of thing, and different tactics. The friendship amongst those guys went right through up till Christmas. I think we lost 16 and won 4 and drew 2. Then after Christmas we did exactly the reverse. But we had a great time, good lot of lads. We trained to an extent, not like they do nowadays, but we enjoyed ourselves, we enjoyed the football, we enjoyed a social life. That was the start of my time with the Tigers. I spent a lot of my time as captain of the second team, and eventually that was disbanded in 1955, and after a 2-year gap they decided to reform Leicester Extra First, but with different political motives. And they asked me if I would go back as secretary. Well, I went back there. I enjoyed it. Lot of good lads, a lot of local lads in the scene, and we went on. We were forming a good relationship with local clubs.
Of course, in 1961, you became the first team secretary, but who was the club secretary at that time?
The secretary was Ronnie Gerard. Now, Ronnie was the managing director of Walker's, who became Walker's Crisps. And he spent a lot of his time flipping backwards and forwards from America, developing his crisps. And I had a lot of responsibility and respects, but I enjoyed it. And in '66, I became the secretary of the club. You must remember that in those days, the secretary was the boss man of the club. He was the dictator. I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to do because the club had been living to a large extent on nostalgia. It was still living way back in the 20s when it was a superb, great club, invitation only, stars. And so we set about trying to make it a members club where everyone was part and parcel of the club. The membership in those days was about 1,200. And when I became secretary, I did make the suggestion to the treasurer, Ronnie Bedingfield, that probably a good idea to put the subs up because I think the fee was then something like £5. And we were in the red. I think it was £12,000 we owed in those days. So we changed things, we tidied things up. We put the old age pensioners membership fee from 10 bob up to a quid, that's 50p up to £1. We had 8 to resign over it. We gradually created an atmosphere, not a lot of success on the field, but with times were changing. The younger players were having a say in the committee. My idea of a committee was ideally a third of the old stabilisers, third in the middle, and a third of players, all blokes who finished playing. A skipper came along called Mike Wade. He was an old Wiggistonian. He'd played for England when he was, 17, 18, or he played for the Tigers when he was 17 or 18. And he became skipper in 1964, I think it was. And he said, why don't we try some discos? Or it wasn't discos, live groups. And the lads all mucked in. We cleaned the clubhouse up because, the place was a dump in a lot of respects. It was a big ground, not a lot of money spent on it, because during the war, incendiary bombs had been dropped on the ground and they'd burnt about a quarter of the Crumbie stand down. But that had been repaired, walls had been repaired, but there wasn't the money about to do a lot to the ground. We started these live groups, which became the one of the centres to go to on a Saturday night. A lot of wrangling with the laws of the drinking and everything else in those days. But it thrived, and if you weren't in the Tigers clubhouse by 9 o'clock, most Saturdays, probably every other Saturday, you wouldn't get in the place.
So it's always been a real family club, hasn't it?
Yes. You must remember in the old days, going back to Tommy Crumbie's days, he's the bloke who made the name of the Leicester Football Club. His idea was there was always the best team in the country to play at Leicester. And he brought blokes in from all over the country. I mean, this wasn't in Crumbie's time, but I sat at a dinner, Leicester Thursday, 75th dinner or 50th, whatever it was, at the Holiday Inn, and Dougie Kendrew, who was became or had been the Governor General of Australia. I sat against him. Now, he'd played for the Tigers in the 30s, and he'd been a first lieutenant in the Leicestershire Regiment. And he said to me that he'd been moved from Glenparva Barracks at Wigston over to Northern Ireland, but he still played for Leicester.
Lots of famous names have come through the Tigers over the years, perhaps particularly in the 1970s when the Tigers really came to prominence, certainly in the Cup, because of course there was no league competition in those days as such. But the likes of Cusworth, Hare, Wheeler, Dodge, Woodward, of course. Who are the sort of players over the years that you've particularly enjoyed watching?
I enjoy the team of probably around the 80s, but the best team that I thought had got more football in them all the way through was the youth side, I started the youth side in 1973. There was this team playing called Leicester Ravens, run by a guy called David Lyons, and I saw the way the game was going. You weren't going to get the stars to come to Leicester, and in a lot of ways the stars weren't a lot of good to you. Tony O'Reilly played for Leicester. In 3 seasons he played 16 games for us. You know, he was a great wing three-quarter, great character. And there were other people, but times changed, and if they came to Leicester they were expected to be clubmen. But anyway, we started this youth side, and they were brilliant. There were footballers, there were 15 guys on that park who were athletes from top to bottom. These were kids of under 19, and they were a joy to watch. And some of the football they put on the park, they were a great credit to rugby football.
Any names that people might recognise in that side?
Well, not there instantly, but Paul Dodge, Steve Kenny, Steve Redfern, there were stacks of them came through. Chalky came on the scene, Chalky White. He was still learning about coaching. He came on. He wasn't fully appreciated by a lot of people. He'd had 2 or 3 years there, went had a lot of success, and one president came to me and said, "You've got to get a new coach." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, we're not getting the results." I said, "You've got to have a bit of patience. Times are a-changing." The credit I gave to the change, all the change to, was a bloke called Robin Cowlin, prop forward from Gloucester. He'd played for Gloucestershire, when county football meant a lot, and he'd been in probably 8 or 9 county finals. He'd been with Gloucester, who were always a successful side, and when he appeared at Leicester, and on a Saturday after a game, he was wearing a Gloucester tie, a Gloucestershire blazer, and my hackles went up, and I went and got him a 15 players tie, and he wouldn't put it on. And I had to sort out with him, you know, what's the matter? What do you suggest? He said, the forwards don't train hard enough. So took it on board. Graham Willers came out of retirement. Bob Rowell did a lot of work, and John Allen stripped off. And we used to have 10, 20 minutes scrummaging on the scrummaging machine, and times definitely did change. And we started not a dominance in the true sense, but we existed on 30-40% possession, but we knew how to use it, and we made it use it. People joined us. Peter Wheeler came, although he was one of 3 top class hookers within the club. We got John Elliott then, who's the National Development Officer for the Rugby Union. He joined. He was a trialist. And Danny Pickering, who was a big pal of Wheeler's, are all first class hookers. Woody came. We had people like Mike Yandel, Brian Hall joined. But you mentioned Clive Woodward. What a bloke to watch he was. He'd probably give away a try, but he'd always score 2. He was all over the place, a fantastic bloke.
Thank you so much for listening to this interview. If you enjoyed it, please click on the like button and ring that notification bell. And there are many, many more to listen to on this channel, so make sure you subscribe if you possibly can. Thank you.